Yo, what's going on, Serpa Squad? Tanner here, and this past summer, I showed you how I built a DIY backyard pond, Aquascape built me an ecosystem pond out front, and I've done various pond-themed projects since. That wasn't enough though. There was another request that kept finding its way through the cracks, that being to set up a patio pond. It's a project that I didn't plan on doing, but I found this faux barrel planter pot at Walmart for $10 on clearance. The rest, as they say, is history. Here's a closer look at the planter. It holds about 15 gallons of water, which isn't bad considering the price. I personally think it looks nice as well. For this project to work properly, I had to make a platform. I set a piece of egg crate on top of the planter and marked the shape. Using this as a guide, I cut along the markings with wire cutters. It fits perfectly into the planter, but it won't work just yet. I measured the distance between the egg crate and the bottom of the pot. This measurement will determine the height of the PVC table. Here I have 1/2 inch thick PVC pipes and PVC side outlet elbows. I set the elbows on the egg crate and made calculations for the table's dimensions. I cut off the pipes to the appropriate lengths with a pipe cutter. The components were then put together, starting with the top and bottom portions of the table. The supports were then attached to complete the structure. You'll notice that the bottom of the planter is uneven. This would cause issues with the table, so I poured in gravel to level the surface. Now you can see how the components of the shelf fit together. The PVC table adds stability to the egg crate shelf. To keep them together, I used a few zip ties. As is, the pipes are full of air, which would cause the shelf to float. No problem, I just drilled 4 holes in the bottom and top of the structure. Now then, let's continue with the setup. I'm using pagoda stone for the hardscape. This is a great stone with a lot of texture and character. I'll also be using a Kedsum 130 gallon per hour submersible pump equipped with a 1/2 inch nylon tube to create a waterfall. Lastly, I have some great stuff, pond and stone expanding foam, and insulation foam. Per usual, I began with the hardscape. In doing so, I placed the stones in a way that would allow me to create the waterfall. While placing the stones, the position of the waterfall was set using the rule of thirds. During this process, I had to be very mindful of the striations on the stones. It would look unnatural if the lines were going in various directions. With the rock formation in place, I worked in some spider wood. After scaping, I put the pump into the planter and trimmed some egg crate to feed the cord through the back. The vinyl tube attached to the pump was ran through the bottom of the egg crate in between the stones for the waterfall. The excess tubing was removed and the spiderwood was put back in place. It's really starting to come together at this point, but it wouldn't hold up. That's where the expanding foam comes into play. I sprayed this along the back side of the structure and in between the stones to hold everything together. I also placed gravel over top of some of the sections to conceal the foam. After that, I let everything cure for a few hours. At this point, I was confident that everything was held together and secure. I went around with wire cutters and removed excess egg crate. The weight distribution of this isn't entirely balanced and the structure is top heavy. That's why I drilled 2 holes in the back of the planter and secured everything with zip ties. Before moving on, I used a razor scraper to carve away some of the excess foam. Here's how this scape looks now. It still needs a lot of fine tuning and detail work, but I think it looks great. Time to fill it up and get the waterfall running. As you can see, the water flow was way too strong. To deal with this, I added a ball valve to the vinyl tube to regulate the flow. I also put a few stones over top of the output to direct the flow. Now that the waterfall is working well, I removed all of the water. Next, I applied some more expanding foam along the bottom of the front of the structure. Once it was cured, I carved it down like before. A vinyl tube was inserted into the back of the egg crate for a sponge filter I'll add later on. From there, I got a sheet of extra pond underlayment from the DIY pond. I'm using this as a barrier for the plant area. While we're talking about plants, let's take a look. I have an array of different ones here which I'll name as I go. I should also mention that I'm using sea chem fluorite for the substrate. To start, I put down a base layer of substrate. Then I began to plant, starting with an Alocasia amazonica poly. Next was a Syngonium podophyllum berry illusion. As the plants were situated, I gradually added more substrate. A variegated Moronta was also added to the mix, along with another Syngonium. Next up was a huge mat of Bacopa caroliniana. This one will really help soften the embankment. I moved on to some smaller plants, including Alternanthera ficoidea Christmas tree and Hemigraphis reponda. Both of these will help create some great texture. The last larger plant was a rabbit's foot fern. Once I had the terrestrial plants addressed, I moved the pond over to the floor. I added a thin layer of topsoil to the bottom of the planter and capped it off with some gravel. From there, I proceeded to fill it back up with water. I should mention that I added dechlorinator prior to this point. Now we can get the aquatic plants addressed. I'm keeping it simple with a bulletproof plant like Hornwort. This one is bushy, fast growing, and will really help hide the PVC support. Plus, it's not very demanding, and the rice fish will like the coverage. Next up is the star of this setup, some cuttings of a mosaic plant. This is a type of Ludwigia that gets awesome growth that breaches the surface of the water. These and other floating plants will really help soften the water's edge and create some awesome texture. From there, I added a good handful of Azolla caroliniana. Then another handful of redroot floaters. Lastly was some Salvinia minima and duckweed. Again, the idea here is to get a lot of textural contrast from the different plants. After that, I proceeded to add a lot of fine branches to the hardscape. These are those little details that will really help take the design to the next level. Last but not least were the mossy elements, including some sphagnum moss, fern moss, and liverwort. Unfortunately, I lost most of that footage, but you get the idea. There you have it, an awesome rendition of a mini indoor pond, or what's commonly referred to as a patio pond. It's a pretty simple system that's basically set up like a riparium where the planted area is mostly submerged underwater. The benefit to this is that you're not going to forget about watering the plants, and they also help filter the pond. I'm not sure if all of them will work in this setup, but I've had varying levels of success with all of them before, so I suspect that we're good to go. I also added a small sponge filter that's powered by a USB mini air pump. This probably isn't needed, but it will help get the cycle going as it's a cycled sponge. Additional oxygen in the water column never hurts either. I also added some Frit 7 to help cycle the pond faster. Once the plants are established though, a setup like this doesn't even need a filter, and water changes can be kept to a minimum. I know you're probably curious about lighting, but that's going to have to wait until whenever we stock this with the rice fish. That said, don't overthink it, all you need is a bright light. Something that's 2000 lumens or higher should be sufficient. For now, that's going to do it for this project. I hope the video helped illustrate that it doesn't take much to make a beautiful living piece of art. A lot really is possible with a little ingenuity. If you want to see this stocked with the rice fish, then stay tuned. I'll be doing that in just a few weeks. Until next time, Serpa Squad, take care and peace.